Hi, Ralph. Hey, it's good to see you. Thank you very much for including me in this tremendous program of yours about heroes. I know this has been a passion project of yours for many years, and it's a labor of love. And I'm very appreciative that you included me, along with many others, to talk about who the real heroes in life are. And so I'm very excited that at the ripe young age of 90, that you decided to include me. I guess I've made so many mistakes over the last 90 years that I can pass on my mistakes and how I would solve them if I were your age. But instead of that, I'd like to just give you my humble take on my own personal experience with what I conceive to be the real heroes in life. So what's my definition of heroism? I've given this a lot of thought over the years, especially when you said that you'd like to interview me about this, and I've thought about this, and it's very simply this. I feel that a hero is a person, man or woman, boy or girl, who courageously, day by day in, day out, night in, night out, consistently, courageously is an unselfish server of other people, in the sense that in time of need, in time of want, in time of health, in time of security and safety, especially in a perhaps dangerous or very uncomfortable situation, without regard to his or her own personal safety, convenience, profit, motive, selfishness, bottom line, what's in it for me? Will this help me? How many tweets do I get positive? What's my Facebook recognition on this? Does this help me be a celebrity? Does this help me become rich and famous? Will I make money? What will I get out of this if I do that for them? Without those questions, a hero simply does what they see is right in the face of the situation they face, and takes that action without regard to personal safety and personal interest. In other words, instead of a status seeker, they're the ultimate servant leader. And that's what I feel that a hero is. And it's very surprising because it's different from what most people think. I know we're a celebrity-driven, if you will, virtual reality, artificial intelligence. We live in a virtual world where we're trying to stand out while fitting in. We don't want to make too many waves. We don't want to get people upset. We don't want to do things that are too different. And yet, we want to live a life of significance. And significance and being special is what everyone secretly wants in their own way. And I remember when I was debating someone who said that even Mother Teresa was selfish because she was selfishly pursuing her altruistic service of the Lord. And I happened to debate by saying, when you wash someone's feet, and when you do it every day, when you help someone who is desperately ill or desperately impoverished, and you do it every minute of every day with that unselfish desire, you're not doing it for your own selfish need, because there are many things you can do in service to society that don't involve the humble giving of yourself every minute of every day without question. So a hero is a totally giving, unselfish, courageous, acting person, but especially one who represents that kind of heroism every day, and would, if any situation arose where he or she might have to sacrifice even his or her life in the saving of another person, of a child. Sometimes this is done even by people who are saving a cat on top of a power pole, or a bear, or a dog that's stuck in a hole, or an elephant that's in the mud. Acts of courage and acts of heroism occur every day without any possible thought of how I'm going to be featured. It's just done for the sake of doing it. That's what I think a real hero is in today's society, and should be looked at instead of a celebrity or someone that you would like to be like so that you would be more significant and be more special. That's turning your life inward. That's taking a selfie of yourself rather than turning the camera out on what I can do for the broader world and the other people who live in it. And it takes a very special kind of person to be that way, in my opinion. So my definition of heroism is simply that: being a servant leader instead of a status seeker every day of your life, and always looking for a way in which you can make life better for someone in need in that moment of time without thinking of yourself. That's basically it. The question is, who do I think are the heroes, the real heroes in today's society? Well, they might surprise a lot of people because a lot of people feel much differently than I do. But I've been around for a while and I've seen it all. I've been there and done that. And so my take is that today's heroes will probably not go to the White House. They won't be covered by a television or radio or a podcast perhaps like this. They won't be covered by the media because they're so busy helping other people on a daily basis that they neither seek nor gain the attention of the media because they're just too busy serving every day, the soup kitchen of life. Somebody would be reminding me would be a school teacher. Goes to school every day, doesn't matter what grade, kindergarten on up, maybe even preschool, maybe even just babysitting, and someone who devotes their day and time to benefiting the people that they serve unselfishly. Oh, they may get paid and maybe they do that for a living, but they're passionate about it, and so passionate that they're not clock watchers. I remember spending the day at a neonatal nurse facility. I was visiting my prematurely born grandnieces. There were 4 of them. So the quadruplets were born and they were very undersized. You could fit one little baby in the palm of your hand almost. And so I was observing through the window the neonatal nurses. And they had their gloves on. They were taking care of these premature babies. And I noticed it was maybe 15 after 5, 20 after 4, quarter of 6. But they weren't punching a time clock in and out. So they finished their job and then they go home. They were so engaged in what they were doing that time was not of the essence. What they were doing was of the essence. And so a neonatal nurse, somebody that works in the emergency room, a school teacher at any grade, at any age. And I remember one music teacher that I read about. And her students were telling her, I think they were middle teens, they could have been junior high school. And she was an incredible pianist. And she had an absolutely marvelous nightingale, beautiful singing voice, as beautiful as any of the children had heard. And they said to her, Miss Edwards, you should be on stage. You should be performing. You have such great talent. You have such a beautiful voice. You could be performing in front of millions on TV or on the stage, and you could be earning a lot of money. You could be famous and rich. And she smiled and laughed and she said, well, maybe, maybe not, but that's not what I'm all about. You see, I love you children. I love teaching children. I love playing the piano. I love the music. I love teaching music, expressing and expanding music, and I love being your music teacher. And that gives me the greatest thrill in life. And I thought about people like her and people like emergency room people. I thought of bus drivers. I thought of people who are helpful. I thought of people who give up their seats for a older or a person in need. I thought of somebody helping somebody across the street, of somebody stopping to help someone get up. I thought of all the people who every day, in every way, do something that enhances life itself, that with their own God-given talents, they express a desire to serve life and make life a bit better. I know Einstein said some wonderful things. He says, strange is our situation here on the earth. We're here for just a little while, not knowing exactly where we came from or where we're going or why we're here, except for the fact that it makes sense in the relative scheme of things that we're here to make life breathe a little easier for someone else, to make life breathe a little easier for someone else. The great physicist Albert Einstein. I think almost everyone, when they come to the 90th year, if they're fortunate enough to live a long life like I have, they're very grateful for having been given the gift of life. And so I think they're very, very humble. And I think a hero has no room for conceit, hubris, to be powerful in the eyes of others, significant in the eyes of others, but only a courageous helper in a dire or simple situation requiring nurturing, compassion, giving, and helping that person become all he or she could be. Even a small act of kindness, to me, is an unsung hero. And the reason it'll never be covered is it's not a single event. They haven't rushed into a burning building. They haven't saved someone's life almost giving up their own. But they haven't sacrificed a part of their body for that. Although there are many heroes in life who do that, and I, among all people, having been brought up during World War II in the late 1930s, the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, being through World War II, being through just after the Depression, coming from a relatively poor family, not having much in the way of any financial benefits, and yet always seeing the good in other people and other things. So the unsung heroes are my special people. I see them every day doing things for other people unselfishly, just as servant leaders instead of status seekers. So that is my definition of who the real heroes are today. They're not the ones that are getting the big dollars, getting the big coverage on the media. They're not the celebrities. And some celebrities are good role models and some are not. And some powerful business people are very humble and very giving and they make life better for people, and some are more selfish and more interested. But again, a hero in my opinion is someone who turns his or her camera of life out rather than turning the selfie in, and does not always have to be the center of attention or attraction. In fact, the perhaps greatest feeling is in the giving and the doing and in the helping. The self-satisfaction of living a life where your own value is expressed and given to others to make life more rich and valuable for other people. I'm not exactly a hero in the eyes of others perhaps, but I want to be a hero to my children, a role model, a mentor, a coach. I want to set an example by my actions rather than just by my words. And I don't want to say because I'm your father, do it, or because I say so, or because I'm your commander. I want to be able to say to people, because I've thought about it and I want to hear about it from you, and I want you to tell me your side of it. I want to listen to you. I want to listen to your need and listen to your want. And I want to try to be someone who encourages you and helps you rather than a critic. I want to be a coach, not a critic. Well, your next question is obvious and you already know the answer. Am I an optimist? Of course. I'm a different kind of optimist. I'm not a Pollyanna. Now, Pollyanna was a little girl, was the subject of a book written in the 1800s, could be 1800s or early 1900s, about a little girl named Pollyanna, and her father would bring up something negative, and then she was required to come back with something positive. And it was a game they played about bad, good. What's good about that? I remember having to play that with my mother. My mother would say it's a hot day, and I'd say good day for the beach, and it's warming the flowers. She said, ooh, it's raining. I said, good for the flowers. And there was always something that she would say negative about the world. You know, doctors are only interested in the money, or attorneys are all crooked. And I would say, but some of them really are either defenders or prosecutors who are trying to uphold the law. So I was always trying to come back on her, but I'm a qualified, learned optimist. Optimism is the biology of hope. It's much more than the placebo effect. Optimism is very much like prayer in that you're asking for and expecting an outcome, a positive outcome, by asking something of a very, very powerful force. Optimism is psychosomatic, physiological. It's the total mind-body effect. I've studied the placebo effect most of my life. The word placebo is Latin, which means I shall please, placebo. And a placebo is an inert substance, sort of like a sugar type substance, that is given to people who believe they are getting a drug. And a drug is tested by the effectiveness of that drug as opposed to the effectiveness of the placebo. And so people who believe that the placebo is the drug have a certain optimistic outcome. In other words, the mind and body tells an optimist self-expectation is motivation. You're not motivated to do anything unless you expect the outcome to work out for you. Because why would you do something you think is going to fail? You wouldn't put much effort into it. So the idea of optimism is believing and expecting a positive outcome. It is the very definition of faith, because faith is a two-edged sword. You either believe it or you disbelieve it, but there's no such thing as a lack of faith. There's only good faith and bad faith, or optimism and pessimism, optimism and cynicism, and never the two shall meet, because optimists rule the world. They see a better future. They invent things. They're inventive. They're also people who innovate. They take something that exists and make it better. They're always trying to better rather than criticizing what they don't like or always complaining. Instead of protesting, they're inventing and doing. Instead of sitting in the stands, grandstanding, telling what's wrong on the field, they get on their own playing field and set an example in their own lives, no matter how little or unspecial that might be. So I am a qualified optimist. I'm a realist though. So do I believe that I will live forever in the body? No. Do I believe that my life will end in the material sense? Yes. Do I believe that I will be well known for who I am many years from now? No, not necessarily. It's not important. So my significance is not based on whether I will live on through history as this person. My significance comes from my own insignificance in being an oboe player in the 15th row of the maestro's orchestra. So I'm not the conductor of my life. I'm part of the maestro's orchestra. So I'm a player in the game of life who's optimistic about my expectation. And my expectation of positive things motivates me to always look for the answer. What's the solution? Well, what can I do? Well, I know what's wrong and it's not good, but what can I do to make it better? In this moment, what should I do? How should I best behave and respond rather than react to what is going on? It's very, very important to be optimistic. It enhances health. It releases positive hormones. It releases the endorphins. It releases energy. It gives you more healing power. Actually, you can visualize, as I've helped Olympic athletes do many times, I've helped people visualize the outcome over and over again to the point where the visualization of the outcome becomes from virtual reality to reality, from practice to opening night, from simply coaching to behaving. And that's why it's so important to be a realistic optimist. Is there evil in the world? Yes. Is there hate in the world? Yes. But I'm not part of it. I don't hate anyone or hate anything or wish any evil on anyone. I don't have a vengeful thought in my mind. I don't want to get even with anyone because I know that success is the only revenge. And revenge is a terrible word. Revenge is the worst use of energy, and thinking and hoping that someone will fail or be put in jail or anything else because you don't like them or what they do or what they say, and you have a hate for them, so you wish the worst for them. You should let the higher power, you should let God take care of that. And in your own life, you should be a realistic optimist. Evil exists, bad exists, problems exist, horror exists, war exists, famine exists, poverty exists, and you need to know it. And you need to see it up front, close and personal, so you don't live in a bubble of thinking that people down there experience this, but you're above all that. That's why I love to travel all over the world, and I've spent most of my life traveling to every part of the world in every type of situation, every religion, every good and bad, impoverished and growth area, the highest and the lowest, the best and the worst, so I can get a realistic take on what 99% of the people on earth are facing. They're just trying to get a roof over their head, or a meal for the day, or food for their children, or sustenance for one more day of life. And that's the reality of it. But the optimists help them. They try to grow things, help them grow, they help them learn, to help them succeed, to make it easier for other people, and to donate their value and give their value into making that better life exist for everything living in life. That's what I mean by being a realistic optimist. I don't look at the world through rose-colored glasses. I look at the world through the glasses that the other people are looking at me through. I practice the greatest of all gifts of emotional intelligence, which is empathy. I try to walk in the other person's shoes or the Indian's moccasins before I pass judgment on the people. Before I judge, I take a good look at my own face in the mirror and ask myself what kind of role model I am for other people. And that's extremely important for me. So definitely, I'm an optimist. I thought about this point also, that whether I've had a dream throughout my life, a vision that has driven the course of my own life. And the answer would be yes, but I can't tell you exactly the form of the dream throughout every part of my life. When I was a little boy, my library card was as important as a MasterCard. Remember, I was raised in the early 1930s. There was no television, there was radio, and there were books at the library. So you could read, you could go to the movies, and you could listen. But there was no television. So what I did is I got a new book every week and read it. And the books that I read were both fiction and nonfiction. And I read nonfiction to know more about the history of the world and the world I had not yet visited so that I could learn more about what I was getting into. And the fiction was to help me fantasize and imagine the kind of world that I wanted, because I remember another Einstein situation where he said, imagination is greater than knowledge, for knowledge centers on the things we now know. But imagination concerns the things that we will yet have to learn and that are in the future. Imagination rules the world, not knowledge. The things that we imagine to exist for the future. So as a little boy, I always imagined an adventurous, courageous, exciting, hero-type life. But in those days, it was Batman and Superman and the comic book characters. And so I'm sure that I played out my different role in those set of shall we say, comic book characters. But my vision as a little boy, I knew that inside I wanted to do something special, be something special. I developed an ability and a love for words, for reading, for writing, creative writing, and for talking, obviously. And I talked a lot, and I wrote a lot, and I read a lot over and over again. And I had an interesting childhood because my parents were arguing, and they had a very difficult life financially together, and my mother and father argued a lot. And I remember putting my pillow over my head and crying myself to sleep, and they would argue about money and lifestyle and what they didn't have and what he didn't earn and what didn't happen. And I must admit, as a child, that early vision was mostly a vision, an imaginary vision of being somebody different, not argumentative, someone happy. And I remember getting on my knees and beside my bed, and I did. I said, God, guide me never to drink, never to smoke, and never to get married, because those things seem to be very difficult, because my parents were arguing a lot over the fact that he smoked and he drank a little bit and he was not successful financially and he procrastinated and he liked to relax on the weekends, and my mother had visions of movie stars and exciting things, and it just didn't work out. So my mother was very negative, and that was an important role in my life, because her being very negative meant that I had to develop some kind of shield or some kind of protection against all the negativity, because she said many times, you know, you're likely to be a womanizer like your father, although he wasn't really. He just probably stayed at the office party too long, and I remember once he came home with lipstick on his collar, and that was not a good thing. But on the other hand, my father was positive, and I had this vision when I was a little boy. And the vision was, by the time I was age 12, I found myself that I was the mayor of the junior high school. And I became 10th grade representative. Then I became student body president at my high school in La Jolla, California. So I felt that I was able to express leadership ideas and command the respect of people who respected my ideas about life. And so when I was 12, I had a recurrent dream. And that dream or vision occurred over and over again, and I'll share it with you briefly. I dreamed that I was standing in a big, beautiful hall, and it had a big chandelier overhead. It was some kind of stage. And I was on stage in a tuxedo. And here I was doing this at age 12. And I was looking out at the audience. And there in the front row were my mother, my father, my grandmother, and my aunt great aunt and great uncle, and they, my mother especially, was disappointed that I wasn't more ambitious than being maybe a movie star or didn't have great grand ambitions. And she kept telling me I was going to grow up like my father, and she kept saying that I wasn't special like other people, and she kept comparing us with other people. I remember that I did something on stage. I don't remember what it was. It could have been singing, it could have been acting, it could have been something that I was being featured. And the audience rose after I finished whatever it was I was doing and gave me a standing ovation. And my mother and father stood up, and I remember my mother looking at me and me looking down at her, saying at the age of 12 to myself in my dream, am I a good boy now? Am I good enough now? Am I okay now? Am I lovable now? Am I your good son now instead of your disappointing son now? And so I admit that when I was a little boy, I was trying to maybe get the approval of my mother. I was trying to get the approval of other people to make up for shall we say, a misguided or a fairly low self-esteem, a low feeling of worth, because my mother was always comparing and making other people seem more special than us. So there's probably no question that I was substituting, shall we say, a feeling of self-worth with having other people appreciate me and approve of me. And that's why I had that recurrent dream over and over again. And the answer to that story is that in the 1980s, after having written a number of books and having some success and becoming a platform speaker, I found myself in a big meeting room with a chandelier. It happened to be Carnegie Hall in New York. And I was wearing a tuxedo that night, I remember. And I was made Man of the Year by a nonprofit foundation that I was working for to help children find out their natural talents and become all they could be. And I was featured as Man of the Year, and the audience gave me a standing ovation for my 20-minute talk on servant leadership. And I remember looking at my mother. But of course, in the 1980s, she wasn't there. Neither were my father or my great aunt and great uncle or my grandmother, but in the dream, they were there when I was 12. And I remember in the 1980s when I was doing it, I wished my mother had been in the front row to see that I felt at that moment that I would have gained her approval. So I've had a vision all my life to be special, even though I was raised in a non-special family. And that's very important for people to have this vision or dream that they carry throughout their lives. And I continue to carry that. And my dream or vision is simply this. I want to be a person, a gardener, who plants shade trees for future generations under which I myself may never sit. And so I'm a gardener, like As a Man Thinketh, by James Allen, somebody who is gardening in life and never gets the garden quite right because there's always something to come in to make the garden need tending. So I want to be a gardener who keeps tending and planting shade trees for future generations that I don't need to sit under. And I think my own immortality in that sense is simply the love and the servant leadership that I give to other people. But that's the vision that has driven my life. I have never thought about getting rich or being famous or having power or having the world adore me. I have tried to make up for a lack of self-esteem to get maybe the audience's approval. Maybe I've relished standing ovations. Maybe I've liked being photographed and that feeling of being special like everybody else. Maybe I've had some little teeny piece of narcissism, but in my opinion, hardly any, because I'm not interested in myself. I'm interested in what value I have within, what God-given ability I have that I can make the world a little better for having lived. And that's why every birthday of mine throughout my life and throughout my mother's life, she lived to be 97. So she lived until I was in my 70s, my middle 70s. And so I brought my mother a long stem rose in a vase, in a vase, for my birthday, which is June 6th, which is D-Day, the day the Allies landed on Normandy Beach in 1944. So D-Day is very special. June 6th is my birthday. So every birthday I would bring my mother a long stem rose in a vase with water and give it to her. And she said, "That's really silly. Why would you give your mother a present on your birthday?" I said, "Because, Mom, I want to thank you for giving me life, for making it possible for me to be alive, for bringing me into the world. Thank you so much." And she was overwhelmed that I would, on my birthday, give her a rose because, that's the way I look at it. The gift of life is so precious. And I love life to the extent that I'm so passionate about living and help other people live a good life that I spend virtually all of my time thinking about and doing things to make life better for everyone and everything that I touch. And that really is my long-range passion and vision for life. Do I take a positive outlook or a positive response to setbacks and problems in my own life? And the answer is unqualified yes, I do. Up until the time I was 85, I was traveling all over the world, lecturing. In fact, my most productive years were probably 65 to 85. Those 20 years of 65 to 85 were not retirement. They were re-inspirement. Instead of being retired, I was re-inspired or retried. I was trying to figure out what I could do in those wisest, most learned years to help other people. So I was lecturing all throughout Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, always lecturing on the psychology of winning or the psychology of being more successful or the attitudes and action steps of people who are successful in any walk of life, the real heroes in life. I was doing that. Old age came to me all of a sudden. I discovered that through a different scan and through, if you will, a stress test, that I had aortic stenosis or hardening of the heart valve in the aorta, and I'd inherited that from my mother and grandmother. So long story short, I decided to get a new heart valve, a artificial heart valve, which was an animal heart valve, put in my heart so my heart valve would open and close correctly. And I did that so I could live to be a ripe old age of 100, because I knew that my mother had lived to be 97, and I certainly could live as long as she did because she was a pessimist. And although I loved her dearly and loved her and held her in my arms at the last moment of her life and told her that she was a great mother for bringing me into the world, I also had a more positive outlook on life than my mother. So I figured I probably could make it to 100 if I got a new heart valve. Remember, that's part of being a qualified optimist. And here's what happened. The surgeon, as he was putting in the new heart valve up through my thigh and down at my groin area, he put a new heart valve up into the heart, which stuck into the old valve and started pumping. What happened is, on the way out, as he was pulling out the instrument that's the balloon that puts the valve in, he cut my femoral artery by mistake, and I nearly bled out on the operating room because they couldn't suture the wound because of previous radiation from something before. A long story short, it got infected, and the infection went into my new heart valve. And so I nearly died on the operating table, and I nearly died from a heart infection. And I was in a skilled nursing situation with antibiotics feeding in through a tube into my heart. Actually, it was nearly 6 months. It was 3 months in, and then 3 more months before I could get the infection out of my new heart valve. So by getting a new heart valve, I not only nearly died on the operating table from bleeding out, but I also nearly died from an infection in my heart. And then that went by, and finally I got over that, and that felt pretty good. And I began to get a little bit of a sore throat, and they diagnosed it as acid reflux. But a year later, they said it was a misdiagnosis, and it was actually 3rd stage throat cancer, a viral throat cancer that had nothing to do with smoking because I've never smoked. So I was faced with a life-threatening throat cancer, and so I went through nearly 6 months of radiation and chemotherapy. I was in a skilled nursing facility, had a major COVID a couple of times, nearly died from that, was in a nursing facility for 6 months with burns to my outer throat, and I lost my salivary glands, my taste buds, and my ability to swallow and to eat any solid food. So they put a feeding tube into my stomach, and I was fed through a liquid through my stomach while I was in the nursing home. And then it dawned on me, well, wait a minute. Are you practicing what you preach about optimism? How are you handling this? Because frankly, I was very worried, and all of a sudden it snapped on me that my problems were almost nothing compared to the military people, the people who gave their lives, the people who lost their limbs, the people who have gone through so much more in their lives. And am I going to be complaining or saying, why me? So I immediately took action and say, Dennis, this is no drill. This is your chance to prove by action that you're an active optimist instead of a preacher. So be a role model instead of a preacher. I got an exercycle. I got some rubber bands, stretching bands, a little exercycle. So I began to go through the routine, and I wrote a book called The New Psychology of Winning, which was a sequel to my original book from 40 years ago. I wrote a new book and started a second book during my, if you will, nearly 6 months in that isolated hospital ward where I couldn't go outside, I couldn't go out of the room, I couldn't have any visitors, I couldn't do anything but talk to people on the phone, but I turned it into my office. I stopped wearing a gown because the gown is for people who are sick and who are sick in bed. So I got dressed every day like I was going somewhere, and the nurses said, what are you getting dressed for? You're not going anywhere. I said, not today, but tomorrow. So I began to behave as if I was going somewhere soon, doing something soon, and being part of living rather than somebody who was sick. And I actually believe by doing within while I was doing without, that I was actually practicing what Olympic athletes do to create muscle memory. I was creating my own, if you will, performance dress rehearsals day after day after day. And I believe that that idea, that personal perseverance, that resiliency of realizing that if you don't use it, you lose it. That includes your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth. Pretty soon I got off the feeding tube and I got on to drinking my meals. I never got my saliva back. I never got my salivary glands back. I never got my taste buds back. I never got my ability to eat solid food back, but I've been able to drink my meals, keep my weight up, and enjoy life as a 90-year-old with a quality of life that I must say is better when I consider the alternative. So yes, I do handle setbacks as temporary inconveniences. You know, a setback to me is a temporary inconvenience. Failure is the fertilizer of success, and a failure is an event, not a person. And failure is something I treat as something I need to get past, and I always say, what's the next step? What do we do next? So that's how I handle setbacks in my life, and it's really worked well with me. And yes, it's true, I was diagnosed as now having the cancer moved down into my right lung. And yes, that's a temporary inconvenience. And it's It's something that I don't enjoy, but I'm willing to work through it. So now I'm going through radiation and immunotherapy and the usual situation with beginning stage lung cancer. But when I consider the alternatives in life and my age and the gift I've been given, the fact I'm in overtime, hey, I can handle anything that God throws me, because obviously my work on earth isn't quite finished yet, or at least I hope it's not. What am I doing to make the world a better place? What I'm doing every day is I'm lying in bed maybe from 6 to 6:45 every morning, awake and alert, and I'm deciding what I'm going to do with this special day that I've been given the privilege of living. And I say to myself, okay, this beautiful day I've been given to spend again. Thank you very much for the gift. And then I make it my point to do one thing at least, minimum, that will make somebody or some living thing's life better. I will help a dog or an animal or a squirrel or a plant or a person or someone that I've never met before or someone that I know or someone that I love feel better for me having spent that day. So I will make at least a call, an email, a text, a reach out, a discussion, an act, some action that will make one life or one part of life better for having spent that day. And I do that every morning before I wake up, and then I hit the floor with that in mind. And everything else happens. Of course, there are fires to put out, things not of my own making that I do. But I try to do that, and so I try to do something to make life breathe easier every day. And that is an encouragement, a letter, a passion project for my grandchildren. For each of my grandchildren, I have a passion project. I have that for my children too. And that project is, if it weren't for time, money, or circumstance, what would you do today to make your life better? And I ask my grandchildren that. And they think about it. And I don't mean a new car. And I don't necessarily mean a college education, although that's part of it. But I mean something you're so passionate about. Something that you want to do so much that you can't do it now. But I help them develop some kind of business plan so they can achieve a portion or a start into something they're so passionate about, but they can't quite start without my help. So I want to be a catalyst for other people's passion projects, as long as it's to make the world better for them having lived and helped also have that same idea of being a servant leader. Anything that advances being a servant leader, I'll buy into and I'll help. That's really all I'm doing to make the world a better place, is find something to do every day that enhances life itself. Who are the real heroes in my life today? And I'd have to say at the very beginning, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and eternally, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Mabel Reynolds Ostrander. She came over from England when she was 17. They went to Buffalo, New York. They came to California. And I remember my fondest memories begin about age 7, when her husband, my papa, my grandfather, died of double pneumonia. When I was 7, my brother was just born. And I remember my grandmother then was probably, she was 50 or 49, and she lived 37 to 40 more years by herself in a little framed house. Never had any money and tended a garden. And my grandmother was the greatest influence on my life of any other living hero. She never complained, ever once, in her 87 years that I knew. She never thought much about herself except to present herself in such a way to be clean, to be moral, to be honest, to be nice, to be good, to listen, to give, and always to give. I would come over on my bicycle and I would ride 10 miles on my bike for the privilege of mowing her lawn every Saturday. What a thrill for her to say, "Wow, that's a great lawn. You deserve a piece of pie. You're doing really well, but you could do a little this. Why don't you edge it? Why don't you put the grass that you put in the catcher, put that for mulch, and we'll grow these flowers. And we'll get this plum-cot tree, the combination of an apricot and a plum tree." My grandmother was the epitome of making me feel special, like I had a special future, that I was a good boy. So I was riding away from my mother's home into her mother's home, full of love and encouragement. And she was the greatest role model I've ever had, because I still look at her as the person I have loved the most in my life, including, of course, my children and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren and my best friends. Certainly, my grandmother fits in the number one spot, and I know that my own children feel that way. It's too bad my grandchildren didn't ever really get to know her, because she was somebody really special. And I think of her almost every day of my life before I go to bed, when I wake up. That's what a real hero is in your life. Somebody who encourages you, compliments you, nurtures you, and has your interest at heart. That's the way she was, my grandma, Mabel Reynolds Ostrander. Of course, my next role model, I have to say, had to be my dad, although he left home when I was 9. And they were divorced later, and he went into World War II, and he became on a merchant marine ship. But what my dad did for me, I didn't realize until later. He would come into my room at night, but he never hit me, and he was never mean to us, even though maybe their marriage was not happy. And before he left that fateful day in the 1940s, he came into my room, leaned back against the light switch, and blew my light out. And he would always say, "Just remember, son, when your light goes out, it's dark all over the world." I said, "Not so." I said, "We learned that there are different time zones, and they're waking up in different parts of the world as I'm sleeping." He said, "No, the only world you'll ever know is the one between your left and your right ear. It's the universe within, and you're living strictly in your own mind. And so when the world is dark, so is yours. When the world is happy, so is yours. When the world is encouraging, so is yours. When the world is painful, so is your world. And your world exists the way you observe it. And therefore, my son, remember, life is a perception through the eye of the beholder. It's not what happens so much that counts in life. It's how you take it and what you make of it. And I give you the proposition, son, to make life the best life you can possibly have, because your light only shines through your eyes, the way you're looking at it." And then he left. And I saw him once a year, and he was proud of me, I'm sure, and he encouraged me to go to the Naval Academy, because right after World War II, the Korean War broke out when I was in high school. And all of my classmates were getting drafted. I wanted to go to Stanford or USC and be a motion picture producer. Wanted to be something really great. And instead, I went to the Naval Academy and became a pilot and served my time in the military and served my country. And I would gladly die for my country. I gladly would die for the idea of being free to express myself in a free country without fear of a dictator telling me I can't say this or can't do that. Of course I would. The next hero in my life was Dr. Jonas Salk, the developer of the first polio vaccine. To make a long story short, Dr. Salk and I developed a relationship where I became like his spokesperson for the general public. So I would go out and give speeches, and I worked for the development department as a fundraiser for the Salk Institute for Biological Studies. And I became like a voice for Dr. Jonas Salk to the public to raise money. And I remember him, one of the most brilliant microbiologists and virologists I've ever met, in addition to my best friend, Dr. Myron Wentz, who is similar to Jonas Salk in my mind, but is also my best friend. But Jonas Salk looked me in the eye and said, "You know, Dennis, you're a very interesting young man. You articulate pretty well. You're very bright. You're optimistic. And I encourage you to put science behind what you say and do. In other words, don't just tell people they can do anything they want, be anything they want, and give them this general feeling of Pollyanna. Be a science-based, fact-based, truth-based deliverer of knowledge and information. Don't tell people they can walk on water unless they have pontoons." So he said, tell people they can do things that are just out of their present reach, but not totally out of sight. And to tell them to keep their vision solidly in front of them and base it on truth, knowledge, and fact, rather than just on the idea of get rich quick. You can make $1 billion, you can be a billionaire, you can get rich in the next 90 days, drink this, read this, buy this, listen to this, watch this, and your worries are over. Those are the purveyors of Pollyanna and the purveyors of get rich quick. And he said, don't be one of those. And so as the developer of the first effective polio vaccine, he encouraged me, and he also introduced me to some very important people. He introduced me to Carl Rogers, who headed the Center for the Study of the Person, who was the first one to use the idea that when people tell you something, that you tell them back in your own words what you think they were telling you, so that you give them credit for their opinion or the question or what their proposition is. In other words, you validate other people by the way you answer their question. Carl Rogers was one he introduced me to. Then he introduced me to, if you will, Viktor Frankl. You may or may not have heard of Viktor Frankl. I know you have, Ralph. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist who was in Auschwitz and Dachau during the Holocaust. He led the resistance movement in the Holocaust. And he wrote this incredible book that is the centerpiece for most motivational speakers' premises for speaking. In other words, you don't ask God for your purpose. God asks you for your purpose in life. You decide what your purpose is, and you alone are living that purpose. So you have a purpose behind the purpose in your life, and that is your conscience and to make the world better. And what he gave the people interned during the Holocaust, an idea that the Allies are coming, that there was a reason for hope, that they could get justice if they just lived. He gave the people there a reason to live. And Viktor Frankl became very important to me because he came up with the idea of a statue of responsibility. And I have taken that as to a personal mission in my life mentally. There should be a statue of responsibility standing on Alcatraz, perhaps, facing out over the Golden Gate Bridge. The Statue of Liberty stands in Battery Park on Ellis Island, welcoming in immigrants to a free country, free to be all you can be, free to win, free to choose, free to lose, free to be all you can be. But on the other coast, there should be a statue reminding us that freedom isn't free, that we're responsible for facing the consequences and the rewards of each decision we make every day. And Frankl was the one who said there should be a statue of responsibility so that people would take to heart the purpose they have for the decisions that they make to make sure they're doing things that benefit human life and humankind rather than their own selfish motives. So Frankl was a big hero of mine, and I had the good fortune to attend his lectures at United States International University, which is now Alliant University, very, very important in my life, as was Earl Nightingale. Earl Nightingale was the author of The Strangest Secret. And the strangest secret is we become what we think about most of the time. Yes, it is the original law of attraction. Thoughts become things. Everything was a thought until it became a thing that wasn't of God or wasn't of nature. And so everything that you imagine, if you put concrete words and structures and ideas and written goals to it, becomes concrete evidence, material evidence of the imaginations that you had that took physical form. Every invention was first an image in the mind of a man or a woman upon the earth. Incredible idea. So Earl Nightingale heard one of my cassette tapes in Florida, and he said, you know, you have a kind voice, a believable voice, not a dramatic voice, not a radio voice or a television voice, but a believable voice, and I think you've got good stuff. So if you're ever in Chicago, you should stop by and see my partner, Lloyd Conant. And it just so happened that a couple of years later, I was able to record the Psychology of Winning, which became at the time the most listened to program in the world on personal enrichment and self-leadership. And the Psychology of Winning also, believe it or not, came out of my love for and the heroes in my life during that time, POWs, prisoners of war, the Jeremiah Dentons, the Jim Stockdales, the prisoners of war who were both in World War II and Korea and in Vietnam, who were in solitary confinement for months upon years or years after months, and were doing within. They were always thinking about getting home, being with their family. And they were creating in the 8x8 cell. They were playing golf in their minds. They were doing the scriptures, reproducing the scriptures. They were tapping on their pipe, Morse code, saying goodnight, doing parts of the Bible and the scriptures on their metal pipes inside their cages. The POWs were inspirational to me because I took that concept of prisoner of war and began to study them, and I wrote a thesis, a doctoral thesis on why no American prisoner escaped from a minimum security camp, but many escaped from maximum security camps. And that's because when you're in a maximum security camp, you're a leader and you're bent on action. When you're in a minimum security camp, you're serving your time and you don't make waves. But leaders are put in maximum security camps. And I found that the POWs that I most thought were the heroes were the ones that were thinking of being home, of their families, of creating, of writing, musical composition, scripture passages. Colonel George Hall playing golf in his mind, and he came back shooting a 76. He hadn't played golf for 5 years. The idea of always doing within when you're doing without, no matter the circumstance, took the whole idea of prisoner of war, and I turned that into Prince of Wales, Power of Women, Putting on Weight, Psychology of Winning. My dad was right. Life is a perception to the eye of the beholder. And so the POWs were my heroes. The astronauts, of course, have been heroes. All the people who gave their life in the wars to protect our freedom are unsung heroes. The unknown soldier is a hero of mine, definitely. And last but not least, I have to tell you, Ralph, one of the greatest heroes in my life is a Mexican gardener at our home now named Jose. Jose has our garden, and I told him that it's his garden, that we just happen to live here. And he is so exquisitely gifted at what he does that he treats every living plant and tree and flower as if it is a living creation coming from God. And he comes every Friday, unassuming in his pickup truck. And Jose is the hero of my life. Never be on TV. Probably doesn't do social media. Probably doesn't have a computer. I think he's here legally, but he may not be. But what's important to me is the hero role that he plays. He does what he does without being told what to do. He does it for the sheer exhilaration of doing something to benefit this beautiful landscape. And quietly we watch him as he decides himself what is his mission for the day. Which tree will he prune? Which rosebush will he cut? Which flower will he enhance? What will he do with the grass this day? What will he do with his flower pot? What will he water? What will he weed whack? What will he do with this magnificent garden of his that he has taken upon himself to be the caretaker of? He doesn't get paid much. He doesn't get much attention from the media, if any. He may never. But on the other hand, Jose is one of the greatest heroes I've ever met. He and I are equal, man to man. We look at each other and he says, "Oh, senor, you are so good." And I said, "No, you know, Jose, where are you going?" He said, I send all my money to Mexico to my family, and we have a wonderful piece of land there. And I get to go twice a year, and I'm going again over the holidays." And he said, and I'm going to go down, I send my money there, and it helps the whole family. It helps them all live. And I'm going down there, and it's my sister's 50th wedding anniversary. And we're going to have the mariachis, and we're going to have the greatest cow's milk. And we're going to have the greatest cerveza, the greatest margaritas, the greatest mariachis, the greatest dancing, the greatest music, the greatest fiesta. It's going to be such a great family reunion. I can hardly wait to go. And I said, "Oh, Jose, I would so love to go." And he said, "You could come. I'm happy to invite you. You're welcome to come to Rancho Grande in Mexico." And I said, "Oh, muchas gracias, Jose. I'd love to be there with you." And there it is. The real heroes won't be covered by the media. And yes, I love the 9/11 defenders. I love those who gave their lives. I love those heroes who ran into the buildings. I love those who take people out of burning buildings, who dig people out of earthquakes, who save people during wars and petulance and fires and forest fires and every kind of flood and earthquake possible. I love those heroes. But I also love the unsung, everyday, day-to-day, average, wonderful, marvelous heroes, especially my friend Jose, whose mission in life of planting shade trees in our property, on our property, under which he'll never sit, and I'll plant my own type of shade tree under which I myself will never sit. And that, my friend Ralph, is my long soliloquy definition of heroes. And I know I've gone over on this little podcast with you, but I hope that the viewers understand that I'm so passionate, I'm so honored, I'm so grateful that I've been given the privilege of life. And I'm going to spend every moment of my life, from the rest of my life, however much I'm given, to just make it just a little better for every living thing that I touch. Again, Ralph, thank you so much, and look forward to our next session, and look forward to watching more of your hero podcasts and programs. You've done a great thing, and as I say, it's been a labor of love for your whole life. And God bless you, and thank you so much for having me.